Today, I finally found out what those noises were beneath my stairs. I had been living in the house for about 2 weeks now. It's an old Victorian home, tucked away in a quiet part of Maine. The area around it is mostly wooded, with trees that seem to go on forever, and the town itself is small. One of those places where everyone knows everyone, and strangers are rare. The house is big for one person, but it had charm. The hardwood floors creaked with every step, and the windows rattled in the wind. The walls were decorated with old, faded wallpaper, and there was a certain mustiness to the air, as if the house had been holding on to its secrets for far too long. The first few nights I heard strange noises. I tried to brush them off, figuring it was just the house settling. Old houses like this do that, right? Pipes groaning, floors creaking, maybe the wind pushing at the windows. But even after a while, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't just the usual creaks and groans. There were whispers, too. Just barely audible, like someone was right behind me. But when I turned, there was no one there. At first, I told myself it was the old house, just the way it was. I'd been working long hours. I was exhausted. I figured I just needed sleep. But it kept happening. There was one night I remember more than the rest. I had just finished a late shift, and I'd come home to unwind. The basement, where I had set up my gaming area, was freezing cold, even with the furnace running. The hum of the air vent did little to drown out the unsettling feeling I had in my chest. I tried to focus on my game, putting on my headphones, blocking out the world around me. But then I heard it again, a faint scratching sound. At first, I thought it was just the game, maybe a glitch in the audio. But then the scratching came again, and this time it sounded like it was coming from under the stairs. I froze. I pulled off my headphones and listened closer. Silence. I stood up, moving to the stairs, but saw nothing. Just the dark, cold space beneath. The basement door was tightly shut. I shrugged it off, thinking it was nothing. Just my imagination playing tricks on me. It had to be. There was no reason for it to be anything else. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The house felt heavier somehow. The walls seemed to breathe with me, the air thick and oppressive. I just wanted to sleep, to forget about the weirdness that had been building since I moved in. So I decided to go to bed, hoping that tomorrow would feel like a fresh start. I never could have known that I was only getting started. As I made my way upstairs, I heard it again. A whisper, soft, almost like a breath, but it was unmistakable. It was my name. David! I spun around, my heart racing, but the hallway was empty. I stood frozen, staring into the darkness at the end of the hallway. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what to think. I had been so tired lately. Maybe it was just the stress getting to me. But no, this felt different. It didn't feel like an old house. It didn't feel like the wind or the house settling. It felt like something was trying to get my attention. Like something was trying to tell me something. I went to bed that night, the whisper still echoing in my mind, but I couldn't sleep. The sounds beneath the stairs kept me awake, buzzing in my mind. The whispers, the scratching. I wanted to ignore it, pretend like it was nothing, but I couldn't. I knew deep down that I couldn't brush it off anymore. Something was wrong with this house, and whatever it wasn't going to let me forget. The days that followed only made things worse. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt wrong. I kept hearing those whispers. At first, it was just in passing, soft and faint, like a breeze brushing against the back of my neck. But after the night I heard my name, the whispers seemed to grow louder. It wasn't just my name anymore. It was other things, like soft mutterings, like someone was having a conversation just outside my hearing. It was always in the dead of night when I was alone. I spent most of my time in the basement, setting up my gaming area. I figured if I stayed busy, maybe the noises would fade away. It didn't work. If anything, the basement felt like it was the source of it all. The walls were cold, the air damp, and every time I sat down to play, it felt like the shadows were watching me. I couldn't explain it, but the basement had a strange energy to it, like there was something lurking there just beneath the surface. One evening, I was playing a game, headphones on, trying to block out the world. The world outside the basement door felt like another universe, so far removed from the dim glow of the screen. But it wasn't long before the scratching started again. This time it was louder, more insistent. The sound was unmistakable, like fingernails scraping against the wood. I ripped off my headphones and sat there, frozen. My heart thudded against my chest, but I didn't move. The sound stopped, and for a moment, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just an old house doing its thing. But as soon as I put my headphones back on, the scratching started again, louder this time. Then through the sound of the game, I thought I heard something else. Whispers, coming from just beneath the stairs. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the coldness of them creeping up my spine. I was trying to focus, but it was impossible. I paused the game, not wanting to make a sound, but the whispers didn't stop. They were clearer now, like someone was right there, talking in hushed tones. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and walked over to the basement door, my legs feeling heavier with each step. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. It was dark in there, too dark. I almost didn't want to open it, afraid of what I might find, but I had to know. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I opened the door, and the cold air from the basement hit me immediately. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The space beneath the stairs loomed at the far end of the basement, its shadow stretching like an open mouth. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I moved closer, but I forced myself to look. The storage space beneath the stairs was exactly as I remembered it, old, dusty, and empty. Except it wasn't. I stared at the door, and something was off. The deadbolt that had been securely locked the day before was now hanging loose. The door was ajar, just a crack, barely wide enough for me to see inside. I swore it had been completely shut last time I checked. My pulse quickened as I reached for the door, my hand trembling. I slowly pushed it open. The air inside was thick and musty, the smell of rot hanging heavy in the air. The small room beneath the stairs was dim, with only a sliver of light from the basement overhead spilling in. As my eyes adjusted, I scanned the room. I nearly screamed. The walls were covered in deep scratch marks, jagged and uneven, like something had been desperately clawing at them for a long time. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was what I saw carved into the far wall. My name, David. It was etched into the wood in deep gouges, as if someone or something had taken the time to carve it out over and over again. It wasn't just my first name either. It was my full name, first and last. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped back, feeling the wall behind me pressing against my back. I had to get out of there. But something stopped me. There in the corner of the room was a small weathered box. It looked old, too old for the house even. My hand reached out without thinking. As my fingers brushed the cold surface, a chill ran down my spine, and a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread filled me. I wanted to leave, to run out of that house and never look back, but the box was already in my hand. I opened it slowly, every inch of the lid creaking, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. Inside was nothing but a single, tattered photograph. It was black and white, and the image was too blurry to make out at first. But as I looked closer, I felt a cold shiver crawl over my skin. The photo was of the house, but it was different, older, even more decayed, and in the corner, standing in the doorway, was a figure, a person, but not a person. Their face was obscured by shadows, but there was something wrong about them. The figure seemed to be staring directly at the camera, or rather, directly at me. I dropped the photo like it was burning my hand. The box fell to the floor with a loud thud. I was out of that storage space in seconds, slamming the door shut behind me. But the whispers didn't stop. In fact, they grew louder. They were coming from everywhere now, swirling around me, calling my name, urging me to listen, to come back. I ran back upstairs, heart pounding, and slammed the door behind me. The house felt colder now, heavier, like it was closing in on me. I didn't know what to do anymore. I wanted to leave. I wanted to get in my car and drive as far away from this place as possible. But something was holding me there, something I couldn't explain. I stood in the middle of the living room, the whispering still echoing in my ears. It wasn't just the house making those noises. I realized, with a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach, that whatever it was beneath the stairs had been waiting for me, and it wasn't done yet. I woke up the next morning with a strange heaviness hanging over me. The events from the night before kept replaying in my mind, each one more horrifying than the last. The whispering, the scratches on the wall, my name carved into the wood. But when I tried to shake it off, I couldn't. It was as if something had followed me into my sleep, lingering just outside the edge of my dreams, watching, waiting. I stumbled out of bed, my legs shaky, as if the very air in the house had become too thick to breathe. I tried to ignore the feeling, pushing it to the back of my mind as I made my way downstairs. The house was eerily quiet, too quiet. The shadows seemed darker, more oppressive, hanging in the corners of every room like they were alive, like they were listening, waiting for me to make a mistake. But I had to check the basement. I couldn't leave it like that. I needed to see for myself if I was imagining things. The door to the storage space under the stairs had been left slightly ajar, and every fiber of my being screamed for me to ignore it, to turn around, to just leave. But I couldn't. I needed to know. I grabbed the stairs, my feet feeling heavier with each step. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, each one echoing like a warning. As I reached the bottom, the cold air from the basement hit me again. The damp, musty smell almost suffocating. But it wasn't the smell that made my skin crawl. It was the silence. It was too quiet. There was no scraping, no whispering, just stillness. I stood there for a moment, the weight of the house pressing down on me. The door was closed, fully shut now. I was certain it hadn't been like that last night. It had been wide open, revealing the scratches, the carving of my name. But now it was perfectly shut, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. The undeniable sense that something wasn't right. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling so badly I almost couldn't grip it. When I turned it, the door opened with a soft creak. The noise, somehow louder than it should have been, filling the basement with its shrill sound. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stepped into the small, cramped space. The air inside was suffocating, thick and heavy. The floor was covered in dust. The shelves bare except for a few old boxes half fallen apart. But it wasn't the room that made my blood run cold. It was what I saw. The scratch marks were still there. But now they were different. Deeper, darker, as if something had been trying to escape. I slowly stepped forward, the floor groaning under my feet. My eyes scanned the room, searching for anything that might explain what had been going on. And then I saw it. On the far side of the room, almost hidden in the shadows, was a piece of furniture I didn't recognize. A small wooden chest, half buried under the dust and debris. I don't know why, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. Something about it felt wrong. I hesitated for a moment, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I wanted to turn around, to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. I walked toward it slowly, my hand shaking as I reached out to touch it. The moment my fingers brushed the surface, a sharp pain shot through my chest and I staggered back, gasping for air. It felt like I had touched something alive, something dark and ancient, and I couldn't explain why, but I knew I had to open it. I had to know what was inside. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. The chest was empty, save for one thing. A small old book. Its cover was worn, the leather cracked with age. I picked it up gingerly, feeling an unsettling weight in my hands. The pages were yellowed. The ink faded and smudged, but the words were still legible. As I flipped through the pages, I saw strange symbols, ancient writings, and drawings that looked like they belonged in some kind of nightmare. I felt a cold shiver run through me as I turned another page. There, in the back of the book, was a drawing that stopped my heart. It was a sketch of the house, just like the one I was standing in. But it wasn't drawn the way it looked now. It was older, decayed, like it had been abandoned for decades. The windows were shattered, the roof caved in, and the front door was wide open, as if something was waiting inside. But the most chilling part wasn't the house itself. It was the figure standing in the doorway. It wasn't a person. It was something else. Its face was obscured by shadows, but I could see its eyes, glowing, burning with an unnatural light. They were staring right at me, right through me. I dropped the book in horror, backing away from the chest. The whispers started again, louder this time, filling the air with their frantic murmurs. I turned, my heart racing, and froze. The door to the basement had shut behind me. It was no longer open. It was locked. I could see the deadbolt now, the one that hadn't been there before. I stood there, unable to move as the whispering grew louder, more frantic. The shadows in the basement seemed to shift, to move around me like they were alive. And then I heard it. A voice, clear and unmistakable, whispering my name. David. I turned, but there was no one there. The basement was empty. The house was empty. Or so I thought. I didn't stay to find out. I ran up the stairs, my feet slipping on the old wood, and slammed the basement door shut behind me. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me, echoed in every corner of the house until I could hear nothing but my own panicked breathing. I thought I had escaped, but deep down, I knew better. Whatever was in that basement, whatever was in this house, it wasn't done with me yet. And the worst part, I don't think it ever will be. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My mind was a blur of terror as I scrambled to get out of the basement and slam the door behind me. But even once I was upstairs, in the safety of the living room, the air felt heavy, suffocating, like the house itself was pressing in on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart jump in my chest. Every shadow seemed darker, deeper, and more menacing than the last. The whispers followed me. They were constant now, a distant hum, like an insect buzzing just outside of hearing range, but always there, buzzing, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I couldn't stay here anymore. I knew that. My mind was unraveling with every passing second. I couldn't even look at the basement door without feeling like something was staring back at me from the other side. I had a friend, a guy I worked with, Mike. He was a good guy, maybe too good for my sanity. But I needed to get out. I needed someone who would make me feel like I wasn't losing my mind. I texted him that night, my hands shaking as I typed the message. I told him I needed a place to stay, that I was freaking out about something in the house. I didn't go into detail. I didn't have the words. I couldn't explain it. I was barely holding myself together. Mike responded quickly, but his reply felt off. He told me I could stay, but there was hesitation in his words, an edge to his response. I knew he thought I was overreacting. Hell, I probably was. I'd only been living there for a couple of weeks. And who wouldn't be a little freaked out by an old house at first, right? But I knew. Deep down, I knew there was something wrong with that place. Something that didn't want me there. Still, I packed my bag. I barely slept the whole night. My eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, listening for any noise that might come from downstairs. The house was dead silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses on your chest and makes you feel like you're being watched. When morning finally came, I left. I grabbed my stuff and went straight to Mike's, not looking back. I needed to put the house behind me, even if just for a little while. I didn't tell Mike everything. I didn't tell him about the scratches or the whispers, the door to the basement that had somehow locked itself, or the strange drawing in the book I found. But I could tell that he didn't fully believe me. He just thought I was being paranoid. That night, Mike offered me a spare bed. I slept in it for a while. trying to convince myself that I'd imagined everything, that maybe I was just overtired, too stressed from work. But when I closed my eyes, I could still hear the whispering. My name. It kept whispering my name. I tossed and turned, my eyes snapping open every time I thought I heard something from the dark corners of the room. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the house with me. Even though I was safe with Mike, in a place where I knew nothing could reach me, I could still hear it. It was as if the thing in my house had followed me here. The next morning, I left early. I knew I needed to go back, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to face the house, the basement, the whispers. I didn't want to go back to that place of darkness, of terror, but I had to. I couldn't stay away forever. When I returned, I was surprised to find that the house was still quiet. Too quiet. The air was thick, oppressive, but there was no scratching, no whispering. I took that as a good sign. Maybe it was all in my head. And maybe my fear was just a product of the stress, the isolation, the constant hours I'd been putting in at work. I thought about the basement door, the scratches, the drawing. I thought about the book I'd found, the one with the strange symbols. I couldn't leave it like that. So I grabbed a can of paint, determined to cover up the marks on the walls, the ones that looked like something had been trying to claw its way out, trying to break free. I painted over them, trying to wipe away the memory. I tried to convince myself that I had done the right thing, that I could fix it, make everything normal again. For a few weeks, it worked. The house was silent. The whispers stopped. The air felt lighter. I could almost convince myself that nothing had ever happened. Maybe I'd been imagining things all along. Maybe the house wasn't haunted. Maybe it was just an old house, creaky and full of odd noises like any other. But then last night happened. I was upstairs, playing a game, trying to forget everything. The house was quiet again. The same heavy silence that had settled over the place after I painted over the marks. It was almost peaceful. That was until I heard it. A whisper. My name. It wasn't the same as before. It wasn't faint or distant. Like it had been in the past, it was loud, it was clear. It was as if it was standing right next to me. David. I froze. I could hear it in my head now, echoing around me. It wasn't a part of the game. It wasn't just a sound from the old house. This was something different. Something alive. I stood up, heart racing, sweat running down my neck. I looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The room was empty. The house was empty. But the whispering didn't stop. I ran to the hallway, then the stairs, looking for any sign of where it could be coming from. But the only thing I found was the basement door. It was open again. And the whispers. The voice. It was louder than ever. I didn't go back downstairs. I couldn't. But I knew. I knew the whispers weren't done with me. And I had a feeling they'd never stop until they had what they wanted. I had barely slept a wink. The house had fallen back into that oppressive silence, the kind that presses in on your chest and makes you feel like you're suffocating. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the whispers again. They were so much clearer now, so much closer. It was like they were right in my ear, just out of reach. But that didn't matter anymore. I had to sleep, I told myself. I had to close my eyes and pretend that everything would be okay. I wasn't stupid. I knew I couldn't stay here forever, but I couldn't leave either. I was trapped. The whispers had followed me. The house, the basement, the things that scratched at the walls. They were all part of something bigger, something dark. I was sitting in my room, staring at the wall, trying to ignore the feeling of dread gnawing at me when I heard it. A soft creak, almost like a footstep coming from the direction of the hallway. My heart skipped a beat and I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It was so quiet, so still, but it was like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Waiting for me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend it was just my imagination. The things I had heard, the things I had seen, they were real. They weren't going to stop. The floorboards creaked again, and this time, it was louder. It was closer. I didn't even have the strength to get up from the bed. I was paralyzed with fear, my entire body stiff. my heart hammering in my chest. I squeezed my eyes shut, but that only made the whispers louder. The voice, the whisper that had been following me for weeks, was right outside the door now. "David." I froze, a chill running down my spine. It was closer than before. The voice sounded different now. It sounded like it was coming from inside the room. I could almost feel it breathing on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I had to leave. I had to get out of this house, but my legs wouldn't move. I could feel my body growing, colder with each passing second, as if something was draining all the warmth from me. The whispering became frantic. It was louder now, almost hysterical, as if it were desperate. "David, please, come closer." And then the silence fell. That kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I dared to open my eyes. I felt like something was standing just out of view, just beyond my line of sight. But when I turned my head, there was nothing there, only the empty space next to me. I let out a shaky breath and tried to calm myself, trying to convince myself that I was imagining it. But then I felt it, a coldness creeping up the bed, slowly, inch by inch, like a chill brushing against my skin. I turned my head to look. I wish I hadn't. Right beside me, inches away, was a face. Its eyes were wide, hollow, empty. Its skin was pale and translucent, almost rotting. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin, one that stretched far too wide for any human being to ever make. It was like looking at something that wasn't even alive. Something wrong. It didn't speak. It didn't move. But I could feel it there, staring at me. Its presence so heavy, so suffocating that I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. And then the whispering returned. But this time it wasn't in my ears. It was in my head, echoing, deafening. Like it was coming from everywhere at once. It wasn't asking for me to come closer anymore. No, now it was demanding something. Stay with me, forever. I felt its cold breath on my neck, and it made me want to tear my skin off, to get away from it, but my body wouldn't listen. I couldn't get away. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but all I could do was lie there, frozen in place, while the thing, whatever it was, smiled that terrible grin. I thought I was gonna die. I thought it was over. I was suffocating. I was drowning in fear. But then, in the quietest moment of the night, when the whispers seemed to stop, I heard something that broke me. A voice, my own voice, only it wasn't me. "David, it's coming for you." I don't know how I didn't lose my mind. I still don't know. But the thing, the ghost, the creature, it didn't move. It stayed there, just watching, waiting. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed with fear. But the moment I finally managed to blink, the creature was gone. It wasn't beside me anymore. But I could still feel it. Its presence lingered, hanging in the room like a dark cloud that refused to leave. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I looked at the foot of my bed, and that's when I saw it. The mark. It was faint at first, but it was unmistakable. A scratch, like a long, thin line right at the edge of the bedpost. And then it slowly, agonizingly began to grow. The mark stretched, elongated, as if someone was slowly dragging their nails along the edge of the bed, inching closer, closer to me. And in the deepest, darkest corner of the room, I saw a pair of eyes. Eyes that glowed in the dark. It had come back, and I knew then I was never going to leave this place.